Recently I had a viewer go back and watch my Fallout 5 Raiders of New York series, which is something I'm very happy about as that was a true passion project for me. As they've been watching, they've been leaving comments, and this one in particular sparked something in me. Now before I go any further, I want to preface what I'm about to say by letting you all know that I'm just not someone who's into this genre. I favour first person over third person, and I'm a gameplay over story kind of guy too. I just want to get that out there before I go ahead and say that I think this idea is brilliant. Yeah, that's right, I love it. Now obviously it's not for the specific subgenre or anything. I've already made it clear that it isn't really my cup of tea, but instead it's for the overall idea. The Fallout series contains a host of different games, which are played in different ways. While the modern games are mostly the big open world first/third person RPGs we all know and love, there's plenty more beyond that. The first two games were isometric titles, still very much RPGs but with completely different gameplay from the modern entries. We also had Tactics, which, as the name suggests, is a more tactical version of the game, where you control a squad of characters and it all feels a little more XCOM-like. We've even had more casual games like Fallout Pinball and Fallout Shelter. The franchise has gone in a lot of different directions over the years, but it does feel like the main focus is really on sticking to the first/third person open world that Bethesda creates. But one of Fallout's strengths is its versatility. It's simply a world, an alternate timeline, a place that's different but familiar, which we all want to explore. I would love to see a whole host of different styles of Fallout game in the future, as we know it can work, but right now it feels like it's missed potential. Bethesda can keep making mainline entries in the same open world sort of style, but I'd love to see the IP lent out to other studios to make spin-off games that could give us an entirely different experience. In the remainder of this video, I'll go over 9 different spin-off Fallout titles that I would love to see get made. First up, we'll start with the one that was suggested, a third-person story-focused game. From what I gather, The Last of Us seems to be the gold standard when it comes to this style of game. As such, I want you to imagine a Fallout game made by Naughty Dog. Considering they've already done a bleak post-apocalyptic game, the world of Fallout shouldn't prove too deep of a challenge for them to tackle. In my own version of what this would look like, I'd imagine it following a small number of scabbers, individuals who have to sift through the debris of the past to make their living. They roam through old world ruins, looking for that one big break that can free them from their harsh life. By having the main cast be characters on pretty much the lowest rung of Fallout society, you can really explore the darker side of that world, and the parallels it has to our own. The Last of Us is very much a narrative-first kind of game, and that thing could work incredibly well within the world of Fallout. Hell, we've already seen it work. The Fallout TV show released just last week, and it's received a huge level of praise. There's often jokes about how The Last of Us is more of a movie than a game, and we now know that Fallout can very well translate all the way over to more standard film media, so I see no reason that it couldn't split the difference just as effectively. By also including player agency and decision making, you get to let the player make tough decisions about what they're willing to do in order to survive. Will you steal from settlers to get your next meal? Will you give in to the demands of raiders in order to avoid combat? Will you forsake your one true friend if it means you can finally achieve your goals? The world of Fallout is one that already facilitates these difficult decisions on a regular basis, so a game structured around them would be a simple success in my opinion. Second type of game on this list is a stealth action game, in the style of something like Dishonored. Considering Arcane Studios is also under the ZeniMax umbrella, this one could well happen. In my own vision of this sort of game, it would focus in on the Railroad faction from Fallout 4. You would be an operative of the group, who is trying to escort runaway simps to safety. Much like in Dishonored, you would have the world split up into different areas, each of which is built in order to allow a few different routes to your objective, depending on your own personal playstyle. If you're more of the stealth type player, then you would wait for gangs of raiders and packs of ferals to pass by, before going from shadow to shadow in order to avoid capture. Look for the route which will get you out of the area without having to engage with the enemy at all. But maybe you're not quite as good at pure stealth as you thought. Well, there'd still be a somewhat hidden route for you to take, maybe venturing over rooftops. Less concern about expertly dodging patrols, but you would have to kill a few lookouts posted up high. Or you could go the full violence route. You're getting this runaway simp to safety, and you'll kill anyone who gets in your way. Considering the theme of this game, I think that having it set a few years before the events of Fallout 4 would work out perfectly, not only allowing the gameplay to function smoother, but also providing some extra backstory and references leading towards that game. For the next entry in this list, I've decided to hand the controls over to Nemesis. Take it away, Kato.
Hi there, Wastrels, it's me, Kato Genesis. What if a Fallout spin-off was a 4X game? Consisting of giant, continent-wide, turn-based gameplay where you explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. And probably the most well-known example, if you're not familiar with a 4X game, would be Civilization. And of course, that deals with historical figures in the real world, while something like Age of Wonders covers the fantasy side. But for post-apoc, I've been kind of left wanting. However, the genre has expanded past the violent domination win conditions quite a bit, and you probably get some interesting ideas of what non-violent win conditions would be in a bleak world like Fallout, or even indirect warfare with things like radiation and FEV. So at a baseline, how a 4X game plays out is you start with a settler and a warrior in the Dark Ages, build your first settlement once you find some prime real estate, start making a unit, begin researching tech, and send your warrior off to scout ruins and fight barbarians. That is just how it starts though, because once you got the means to make more settlers, warriors, and other units, your territory and influence increase, and so does that of your neighbors. The obviously fun spin to this would be the whole theme of Fallout in general. There's not really any happy endings or outcomes. In fact, most situations are pretty bleak. So instead of economic, religious, and cultural win states, it could be more dark with the economic wins being related to chem pushing, religious wins related to cults or fanatical factions, and cultural being just an alternative state to the domination win conditions, adopting or assimilating another faction via force. I'm looking at you, Caesar. That's just top level stuff though, and I'd want a game like this to include many eras of leaders from the Fallout universe, similar to Civilization as well. We could have multiples from the same factions at different times, like all sorts of flavors from the Brotherhood of Steel to draw from, like Elijah, Romani, and Lions. Mutants from both the West and East Coast. And the various Enclave iterations could be available as well. Maybe the Brotherhood could find tech faster and research faster as a result, while the Enclave would instead focus on experimentation to create stronger combat units through ethically unchecked means. It wouldn't have the same feel if we didn't have barbarians too, so those of course would be taken up by generic raiders until they get wiped out or given enough time to develop into their own major factions. Villages that grant resources or more population in Civilization could be replaced by various ruins or even wild wasteland encounters, with the occasional vault that may have extra objectives, haunting stories with puzzles, and even their own dungeon map. The only game that came close to this in my mind is one called Surviving the Aftermath, which is a city builder that also happens to have a hex-based world map which you explore with hero units while you wait for your settlement to develop. I've of course got more I can suggest, but basically what I'm saying is all of the cool things about Fallout could likely be incorporated into a game like this. I want to face down my army of the Masters mutants against Frank Horrigan's Death Squad in a radioactive zone for the home field advantage and whisper the three little words, "One more turn."
And now for something completely different. How about a Telltale game set in the world of Fallout? While the actual Telltale game studio might not be in a great position to make this sort of thing these days, the general idea of it would be easy enough to implement anywhere. Just write up a branching narrative, have point-and-click gameplay elements, and use the good old memeable Fallout 4 approval pop-up messages, and you've got yourself a game. In the past, the Telltale games were all in episodes, and you needed to complete the previous ones to typically know what was going on for later entries. But with Fallout, I feel that an anthology approach would be the better path to take. That way you can have a whole host of different experiences, in fairly short, low price but also low cost to produce games, which each give you a slice of life. One could be a Brotherhood hopeful trying to work their way up the ranks, another could be a raider just trying to survive in the harsh wastes, and you could even have more mild and wacky characters thrown in too. Why not play as a robo-brain in one story, or a super mutant, or even a Deathclaw? All you really need is the ability to make decisions as your character. Beyond that, the possibilities are limitless. While the world of Fallout certainly does have its comedic and light-hearted elements, at the root of it all is the fact that this is a country that was destroyed by nuclear war. It is a dying world that has suffered great trauma, and now is a nightmarish place for many to live. To lean in further to the darker side of the franchise, I'd go down the route of a Souls-like. Plenty of people like their Dark Souls and Elden Ring style of ultra-punishing gameplay in a dark world, one where there are few friends, and the actual narrative is hidden deep within item descriptions. In order to facilitate this experience, I would want the player character to be a ghoul, one who is on the verge of turning feral, and as such would struggle to find a place in a settlement, and instead has to delve deep into some of the most dangerous areas of the wasteland. Highly radioactive areas, where no human could ever venture, would be the setting of this game. Not only would this environment rationally reduce the number of friendly NPCs you could find, only being able to include a small handful of sentient mutants you meet along your travels, but it would also help with the boss fight element. Having hideously mutated creatures, the likes of which we haven't seen before, would fit in perfectly with the Souls-like formula. Give us behemoth-sized enemies as bosses to take down, but might not be as viable in a more standard Fallout game. I for one would love to see what kind of nightmarish creatures could be present after hundreds of years of exposure to radiation and FEV. Given how dark and terrifying I find FromSoft games a lot of the time, I think it would be fair to also classify this as a horror game, which is something I've wanted ever since I saw the Fallout 76 Expeditions trailer for the Pit. This had some real dark horror vibes to it, but that's not quite what we got. With the Souls game though, we could definitely tread more on the horror side of things, both with the physical horror of the creatures we encounter, and with the psychological horror of being a ghoul that is steadily losing its mind. Will you be able to fight against going feral? Will you succumb, or will you accept your fate? There are so many interesting decisions which could play a part in this, but going over every possible avenue would take far too long. So instead, let's change gear and move on to the next entry. A little while back, I made a video on 10 cozy RPGs, and one of the games on that list was My Time at Portia. In this game, you are a builder who helps out the citizens of the town of Portia by building different things they request and getting to know them better in the process. We've already dabbled in various elements of building and repairing things in the Fallout games, so going down this route in a more dedicated way seems viable to me. What really made this game strike inspiration for me though, is the fact that My Time at Portia is also a post-apocalypse game. Yeah, not really something you'd recognise just from watching it, but listen to the folks around town and you'll hear all about the Age of Darkness and the horrors of the old world. The church are scared of technology from the past, and there are even mutants who you fight later on. All that same stuff exists within the world of Fallout already. There's a surprising number of similarities between these two worlds when you start digging. All you'd need to make a Fallout game in this style is to place it somewhere that isn't dealing with too many major threats, cutesify the art style a little, and expand modern Fallout's building mechanics a touch. It's a much smaller step than it may first look, but could provide a very different tone of game within the same world. The past couple of game ideas I've mentioned have been open world RPGs, and that's something which we already have in spades when it comes to the world of Fallout. So instead let's focus down a little more again, and instead have a much smaller scope of game, one set within the confines of a single vault. The beloved classic game of Portal is one where you get to use experimental tech in order to escape the underground science experiment you've been trapped in. A Fallout game could very much replicate this general idea simply by replacing a few elements. Having a full-on portal gun in the game might not be allowed by Valve, but even if we couldn't have that, there's plenty of other interesting bits of technology we could have Vault-Tec experimenting with. And given that it's Fallout, the technology doesn't need to be so much physics-bending as it does just weird, wild and wacky. Maybe a modified junk jet which fires fusion cores, as some scientist's idea to power things quicker, or a version of that which clones your character temporarily, and then they just melt down into goo. This would be a great way to not only have a fun puzzle game set in the world of Fallout, but it could also provide a testing ground for new equipment that could feature in future Fallout games. Throw a whole bunch of different inventions and ideas at the player, and see what sticks. Not only could it make a great game, but the idea of having it as a real test for things appeals to me too. What also appeals to me is the Nemesis system from Middle-earth Shadow of War. This is an absolutely incredible mechanic, which leads to the enemies you face remembering you and adapting to your playstyle. I'd say it's one of the coolest modern gameplay mechanics, and it's a crying shame that it's been copyrighted so that we're all just waiting for this one company to do something with it, rather than it being open for all devs to mess around with. But hell, just let Monolith Games have access to the world of Fallout, and they could make this same sort of game, but in the world of Fallout, rather than in Tolkien's world. Something which would need to be addressed is how to have the enemies win fights and remember you coming back, but I don't think that's too tricky a problem to work around. What I do is make the player character a clone. They emerge forth from some experimental facility, and every time they die, they are remade at one of said facilities. Shadow of War is one of the only games where I see dying in it as a potential positive, and I'd love to have that same experience translate over to the world of Fallout. In terms of what you'd be fighting, I'd go with raider gangs. I mentioned at the start of this video that I made a series called Fallout 5 Raiders of New York, and some of the initial inspiration for that game came directly from Shadow of War. Fighting through a host of different orc tribes or raider gangs is functionally the same thing for gameplay purposes, and I know firsthand just how satisfying that feeling can be. Give me the Nemesis system, but in Fallout, and I'll be one happy bunny. Alrighty, it's time to move on to the final entry of the list, and we're jumping on the bandwagon for a game that's been real popular lately, Helldivers 2. Now look, Helldivers 2 is an absolute masterclass in how to make a game be fun, but it's not like it invented the genre of teaming up with buddies to fight through hordes of enemies. We've had Left 4 Dead, Vermintide, and many others within this genre, so I think we can manage a Fallout game without treading on too many toes. The reason I focused in on Helldivers 2 is because, for one, it's super popular and relevant right now, but also because it does the whole ultra-patriotic to the point of stupidity thing really well, and that's something which fits into the world of Fallout. Have the Fallout entry into this game let you take control of members of the Brotherhood of Steel as you attempt to annihilate all the mutants and abominations across the wasteland, and you can really lean into a lot of the elements which make Helldivers great. You can do the blind following of a military regime who is clearly actually evil, but is seen as entirely good by its members. You can mess around with different loadouts and advanced weaponry as the Brotherhood scavenge up more tech as time goes by, and even get the propaganda broadcasts coming in as holotape messages from the Elders or Paladins. Fight your way through settlements of ghouls, battle an army of super mutants, and even take on challenging beasts like Deathclaws and Mirelurk Queens. Honestly, this is a game which pretty much writes itself at this point, so I think I can just leave things here. That was 9 different game genres I think Fallout would fit well into. It's great to have seen the Fallout show get such a positive reception, and I've always been someone who has felt that Fallout's biggest strength over the years has been the franchise's ability to adapt and change into a different format from previous entries. While there are many people out there who don't like change, I think it can be a great thing, and I'd love to see more risks taken with the franchise. Plus, if there were a bunch of different Fallout games being worked on, rather than just one at a time, we'd actually be getting more than one Fallout game a decade from here on out, which I think would make everyone happy. Anyway, let me know your own thoughts down in the comments, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed listening to me talk, and as always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.